Hello, everyone. Very welcome to our webinar on equality, diversity, and inclusion in 2025. My name is Nick Henderson-Mayo. I'm the Director of Learning and Content here at VinciWorks. So today we're going to be looking at workplace DEI issues to be aware of as we come into this year. Over the next hour, we're going to explore the latest in equality, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. We'll also be sharing some resources, looking at a few clips, and of course, answering your questions. So please do share your thoughts as we go through. This is a part of a series of webinars in January that we are looking at in terms of what to prepare for in 2025 in a range of different compliance areas, from diversity and inclusion to money laundering and GDPR and AI. So if you or a colleague would like recordings of any of the webinars that we've done, or would like to come to any of the webinars we're having in the future, we're about to share a number of links with you in the chat, and you can pass those on, or you can click those links and register yourself or see a webinar that we had. We did a webinar last Thursday on the 9th of January on an overview of all the main compliance topics that we think should be on your agenda for the year ahead. On Monday this week, we took a deep dive into health and safety. On Tuesday, we looked at everything AI, GDPR, and data protection. Wednesday, we did AML, sanctions, and fraud. Today, of course, we're doing a deep dive into diversity and inclusion issues. Then next week, we have a special webinar in German looking at some of the key compliance issues across Europe and what compliance changes we can expect with the upcoming German election. That webinar will be in German and is on Tuesday, the 1st of January at 10 a.m. UK time, 11 a.m. in Germany. And one of our panelists today, Thomas, will be hosting that webinar next week. Then on Wednesday, the 22nd of January, we're going to be exploring the compliance challenges and regulatory changes of the incoming Trump administration in Washington. That webinar will be also at 3 p.m. UK time, which is 10 a.m. on the East Coast, 7 a.m. on the West Coast in the US. Lots to say about that webinar. It's going to be a very interesting one. And finally, to round out our January webinar series, we'll be hosting a special product-focused webinar on Wednesday, the 29th of January at the normal webinar time of midday. So if you ever wanted to know about the different ways that VinciWorks can support your business through software, training, consultancy, and how all of our different products are designed to help you, you're very welcome to come along to that one. All of the invites are up in the chat, or just reach out to us if you would like to be added to any of those. So back to today, please do share your thoughts, questions, and experiences as we go through. We will try and get through as many of them as we can in the next hour. Session is being recorded and you'll receive a recording automatically after the webinar. So let's introduce our panelists for today. First is Thomas Falk, who I mentioned, who is the head of our content for EU and Germany. Hi, Thomas. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having me on. Excited to talk about these issues today.
Fantastic. And we also have Catherine Holt, who is our course development expert and works on a range of compliance, diversity, and inclusion topics.
Hi, great to be here. Lots of important topics to cover today.
There certainly is. And you can also download a guide that we produced on what to expect in equality, diversity, and inclusion issues in 2025 and how to prepare for all of those things. That link is coming up in the chat now. You can click on that and have a look through our guide. Okay, let's dive right in. Catherine, what are some of the big DEI issues that we are looking at the moment?
There's a lot happening, but from a regulatory perspective, new and upcoming legislation such as the Work Open Act and the forthcoming Employment Rights Bill has put a significant focus on sexual harassment. But also globally, we're seeing issues like neurodiversity, hybrid working and flexible leave policies, and menopause support at work all be significant issues for workplaces to manage. At the same time, we're seeing a massive rise in employment tribunals, court cases, and discrimination claims that sometimes have arisen because of DEI initiatives, not to mention the political football that DEI has become. We're in a very sensitive time for the whole sector, and it's not just blowback we're worried about, but it seems these days a single spark can cause an explosion.
Absolutely, and we're going to take a look at some of those explosive cases and what they might mean for us all. There does really feel to be some strong currents against the whole world of DEI at the moment. What's caused all of this?
Now, diversity and inclusion issues in business, one would imagine, are quite tied to the jurisdiction the business is in. We've got the Equality Act in the UK and a myriad of different state and local laws in other countries. But actually, diversity and inclusion issues have become increasingly globally linked in recent years. Just think about the Me Too movement, which went global, or the Black Lives Matter protests, and the conflicts between transgender and gender feminists today, which are impacting on employment cases as we speak. DEI is intensely influenced by global trends.
It certainly does seem to be that. And Thomas, where are some of these trends coming from?
Well, essentially, we're witnessing a political climate all across the world, really, that pushes back the idea of diversity and inclusion at work. I'm from Germany. I've lived in the UK for a long time. The same arguments used in the US are, quite frankly, also being used in the UK, Germany, and now increasingly other parts of the world. And it transpires almost weekly. I mean, just the past days, really, we could witness in the US Congress where how senators were attacking the military for going, quote unquote, woke. So it seems like no one is really safe these days. Mark Zuckerberg's another example, who of course is the head of Meta, a company who owns Facebook and Instagram, and announced just a few days ago that he's rolling back Meta's DEI initiatives in an effort to cozy up to the Trump administration. Other global companies from Nissan to Walmart have also recently announced that they're rolling back on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Just a few weeks ago, a court in the US struck down rules that NASDAQ, the tech stock exchange, had implemented, which required listed companies to work towards at least one female director and one director who is from an ethnic minority or LGBTQ.
It doesn't seem to be very onerous, does it? Just to have one or two board members who aren't, white straight men.
Indeed, Nick. And it wasn't just some woke agenda NASDAQ was promoting, but rather they were encouraging their companies to ensure they take the best possible approach to their management structure based on data-driven good governance. Moreover, at this point, numerous studies exist that demonstrate the financial return and organizational benefits of having a diverse workforce and even more diversity on boards. For example, research consultancy, the research consultant firm Boston Consulting Group suggests DEI initiatives can boost profits, reduce employee turnover, and enhance motivation. Companies with above average diversity on their management teams also report innovation revenue at least 19 percentage points higher than companies with below average leadership diversity. Nonetheless, the court sided with the two conservative groups who argued the rules constituted unlawful quotas, and so the rule was struck down. NASDAQ defended the rules, arguing they standardized disclosure and aligned with investor interests, citing studies linking board diversity to improve financial performance. And it follows a strong trend where we are seeing from the incoming Trump administration that is taking a strong line against what they consider activism in business.
It's really a tricky time to be a DEI professional, isn't it? And whether justified or not, DEI has become this political football kicked around the world, really at the highest levels of government, and feels like this trend shows no sign of slowing down. Let's actually ask the audience about that very issue in our first poll question coming up on the screen. Is the political climate impacting your DEI efforts? Yes, significantly. Yes, somewhat. It might impact in the future. No impact at present, or not sure. So we'd love to hear from you. Has the kind of political climate around the world impacted your own DEI efforts? Yes, significantly. Yes, somewhat. It might impact in the future, no impact at present, or not sure. So we're going to leave that poll open for another little moment and have a look at some of your thoughts. So 2% say significantly, 26% somewhat, 26% it might impact in the future, 38% no impact at present, and 8% not sure. So some really interesting results there. And also please do share some of your experiences in the chat. What kind of impact has it had? What are you anticipating? What are you doing to prepare for that? We can read out some of your comments anonymously, of course, as we go through. So we're poised to see a new administration take power in Washington next week, and with so many American and global companies thinking again about DEI as a result of the political climate, Catherine, just how much influence does a new administration have on business inclusion efforts?
At least on paper, it should be very little impact. Private companies can do what they want and have whatever initiatives they like. But as we've seen, the political climate in the US at least has shifted so strongly against the whole concept of diversity and inclusion. The government can have a direct impact on where public money is spent, and many in the incoming Trump administration have promised to reduce or eliminate public spending on DEI initiatives. We already saw this the last time Donald Trump was in office. In 2020, he signed an executive order targeting so-called race and sex stereotyping and scapegoating, laying the groundwork for widespread attacks on diversity efforts in public institutions. On his first day in office in January 2021, Joe Biden rescinded Trump's order and issued his own.
How has this back and forward been impacting on the public sector?
Even without an actual law change or funding cut, many public institutions have been adapting to this shift in the climate. For example, the University of Missouri dissolved its DEI office prior to legislation being implemented, and the University of North Texas reviewed DEI course materials despite exemptions for academic research. Some of this overcompliance is based upon legal ambiguities or an abundance of caution, but much of it is due to strategic decision-making and trying not to upset decision makers and funders. This creates a ripple effect and does put the private sector under pressure. Walmart is one of the most significant examples here. As a result of legal challenges and internal pressure, they reduced investment in DEI, as have many other companies. Meta, as Thomas mentioned. But keep in mind that most of the largest US companies continue to champion DEI, with very few abandoning these efforts entirely. So it's often more of a way to mollify critics rather than a fundamental shift in company policy. A recent analysis by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, revealed that 486 of the Fortune 500 companies still publicly affirm their dedication to DEI initiatives.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because we've seen a lot of these public announcements from companies recently saying they're going to end this program or that program. But when you scratch under the surface, the kind of so-called rolling back of DEI is sometimes more words than action.
Absolutely. And there's a great example concerning McDonald's, actually. They were announced in a lot of headlines as joining the, well, frankly, stampede of corporations revising or ending their DEI practices. Forbes, CBS News, and others all reported that McDonald's was joining Walmart, Meta, and others in ending DEI. But then, in reality, McDonald's released a statement highlighting their steadfast commitment to inclusion. What they are actually doing is to revise hiring quotas in light of a US Supreme Court decision, which said affirmative action is unlawful. They will also stop doing an external survey on DEI, have more discussions with suppliers around DEI instead of asking them to sign a pledge, and changing their name of their diversity team to the Global Inclusion Team.
It's interesting then when you explore what these things mean in practice, it's not necessarily as significant as the media might have us believe.
Yes, and what McDonald's were actually doing here is simply adjusting how they set targets because of a legal ruling, which meant they had to change those rules to maintain compliance. Compliance with the law is, of course, paramount, but business doesn't always have to follow a trend that has no legal implications. In fact, changing direction with every new administration or shift in the zeitgeist can be reputationally damaging, and not to mention expensive, endeavors that are likely to leave no one satisfied.
And Catherine, what about in the UK? Because the Labour government that was elected in July last year has committed to quite radically, in some ways, expanding government and business commitments to diversity and inclusion.
That's right. The UK government have committed to expanding the Equality Act and have already introduced a number of changes and promises around diversity and inclusion. We've already seen promises to require larger companies to measure and report on their pay gaps, not just for gender, but also race and disability.
What does that mean, the ethnicity and disability pay gaps? What will businesses be required to do?
So, large companies in the UK have already been required to publish their gender pay gap since 2017. The pay gap is when you compare the pay of men and women doing similar jobs to see what the difference is, and then try and close that gap between professions or job roles that are supposedly traditionally male over traditionally female. The ethnicity and disability pay gaps are similar. Multiple studies across sectors and industries have consistently uncovered a difference in what an employee from an ethnic minority earns versus a typical white employee. Evidence gathered by the Equality and Human Rights Commission demonstrated that the average white British employee earned a median hourly rate of £11.62, compared to £9.93 for British Pakistani workers and £9.24 for British Bangladeshi workers. Pay gap reporting will hopefully highlight those differences and encourage companies to take steps to close the gaps.
Very interesting to hear about those stats. Thank you very much. And if you'd like some more guidance on pay gap reporting, you can download our own guide to ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting coming up in the chat now, which will take you through how to measure that kind of pay gap and some ideas to close it. We also had a couple of interesting comments in the chat there. One of someone from the audience said that they bid for public sector work in the UK and demonstrating social value such as EDI initiatives is beneficial to that bid performance. Whether that remains true throughout 2025 is uncertain, but they mentioned that the release of the Public Procurement Act 2023 implies that the government, at least in the UK, is committed for now. So thank you very much for that comment. Very interesting, at least in the UK, it's kind of steady as it goes. Let's shift focus for a moment and look at another big challenge and big change for inclusion in recent years, and that's around sexual harassment compliance. Thomas, why has this become so important for companies in the UK in particular?
Well, one of the biggest changes for employers in the UK is the implementation of the Worker Protection Act. It came into force last October and places a more proactive duty on all employers of all sizes to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. We've covered this in a lot of detail last year, but just to summarize, all organizations in the UK should be undertaking a new risk assessment, specifically focused on sexual harassment, create or update a separate standalone policy on sexual harassment, and think about what future steps they can take. After all, the Worker Protection Act is not the end of the compliance story on harassment. It's frankly just the start. Labour's Employment Rights Bill, which is currently going through Parliament, is going to require companies to take all reasonable steps, including mandatory training, and require organizations to prevent harassment by third parties.
Certainly a lot more work for organizations to do on sex harassment because of the Worker Protection Act. We do have a guide to all of your compliance obligations under the Worker Protection Act coming up in the chat now, which you can download and have a look at. And Thomas, although every organisation of any size in the UK has to be doing something new due to the Worker Protection Act, some sectors are more at risk than others, aren't they? And maybe we should be thinking more seriously about preventing sexual harassment, particularly because of the forthcoming Employment Rights Bill.
That's right, Nick. Sectors like hospitality and retail have always been high risk. However, one of the highest risks is occurs arguably within law firms. Some of the unique risk factors law firms possess is the focus on billable hours, meaning often high earners are protected. These individuals also aren't always clear of boundaries between work and personal life. Moreover, people in positions of power in some of these big firms know how, obviously, to use the law as a weapon to protect themselves, cover up their potential abuse, or protect their victim. Plus, the power dynamic of a senior partner and a paralegal or trainee can make it very hard to get people to report or to do anything about it.
Certainly can do. There's always some very troubling stories that come up of those kinds of issues. And let's actually ask the audience about that now. How would you rate the sexual harassment training in your own workplace? Excellent, good, okay, could be better, not good, or we don't do training. So thinking about the sexual harassment training specifically that you do at your workplace, how would you rate that? Excellent, good, okay, could be better, not good, or we don't do training. And also feel free to share any thoughts as well about your training, what kind of training you do around sexual harassment, maybe things that work, things that you don't think work in the chat, and we'll read out some of those comments. We'll give everyone another moment to answer the poll, and then we will have a look at the results. So we have 8% saying excellent, 22% saying good, 29% saying okay, it could be better, 10% not good, and 31% are not doing sexual harassment training. A few comments also in the chat there saying they've not had any sexual harassment training or not doing that. So that is certainly aligning with what we're seeing in the poll there. Very, very interesting results. Thank you for participating in that poll. We're about to look actually at a brief trailer from the VinciWorks' new course around the Worker Protection Act. Just before we play that video though, I want to make everyone aware that we are discussing obviously a difficult subject that can be upsetting. The video is a trailer, it's 2 minutes long. It shows some elements of our new course from the Worker Protection Act. If you don't want to see or hear that video, you might want to step away or turn the volume off for the next 2 minutes. Let's have a look at that video just now.
I was standing next to a senior member of staff and he started to sort of run his finger up the back of my leg.
He was scrolling through to try and find pictures of his penis, and he said, "I'll show you mine if you show me yours."
Lots of people say things like, "It was just a joke, I didn't mean it, you know, you're too uptight," or "I'm just a kind of friendly, outgoing guy."
I think the genie is out of the bottle in terms of understanding quite how prevalent and also quite how destructive sexual harassment in the workplace is. We have had a number of global and international surveys recently which really lay bare the extent of the problem and the impact that it has on victims.
You're always so tense. Honestly, look at you.
Nothing happened when we were together, but outside of work he would be pressurising me to meet.
And he made a number of comments along the lines of, "That's not true, you don't look gay. Do you want to come back with me tonight and I'll show you?"
As opposed to being reactive and thinking about defending claims, all employers now need to proactively think about how they can reduce the risk of sexual harassment happening.
So what are you studying then?
I'm doing engineering.
Engineering? What time you're going to hide that gorgeous body underneath a boiler suit all day? Shouldn't be allowed.
She said, "So in 2 weeks, it's your last day here. We should have sex, and no one will ever have to find out about it."
For employers to be able to get ahead of this is stay on track, stay up to date with these changes, and I'd also recommend having someone, a named individual in your business who's responsible for keeping track of this and making sure that you remain compliant.
So that was a trailer for our new course all about the Worker Protection Act. If you'd like to see more of that course or in more detail, you can write demo into the chat and we'll be in touch to show you more of that course, to set up more about how you can roll that course out into your own organizations or customize it for your own organization. So Catherine, you're a part of the team at VinciWorks that creates these video courses on all sorts of compliance topics. And we saw in that trailer there a mix of drama and expert advice. Tell us a little bit about how those courses are developed.
Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with our training and our courses, a lot of our courses combine drama scenarios with lived experience interviews and subject matter expert interviews. We think that demonstrating behaviours in dramas is a really powerful tool across the board, but I would say possibly nowhere more than in the context of sexual harassment, where talking in the abstract or in legal terms only takes you so far. In dramas, you observe the scenarios, the nuances, the language, the context, the behaviours, and crucially, the emotion. That's why we watch drama, because the emotions resonate for us. That's what we want. With sexual harassment training, it is much more effective than just a list of legal definitions. We need to work hard to show that training is not hollow.
That could be a hard thing to manage from a compliance point of view, can't it? How do we assess if training is working? How do we ensure that the message isn't hollow?
It is a very tricky approach because often it's about perception. If people perceive that harassment is common in a workplace and complaints won't be listened to or actioned, then that helps harassment thrive. If people don't think their experiences will be taken seriously, they won't report harassment. This perpetuates a culture of workplace abuse and entrenches harassers in positions of power. Abusers are bullies who will aggressively target those who speak out against them. Robust policies and reporting procedures that protect people who have been harassed, not blame them, are crucial to tackling harassment. There's been research carried out that shows a clear chain of escalating workplace harassment. Abusers will often start with inappropriate touching and move on to more aggressive behaviours if they think they can get away with it. This is impacted by things like their position of authority or power, the culture of the workplace, and the willingness of people to speak out.
Thank you very much for taking us through that. Really appreciate your time and efforts on creating these courses, and very good to see the different ways that the drama can bring highlight some of these issues in the workplace. Just to say also, if you are currently a VinciWorks customer, you can reach out to your account manager to add those to your portal or to your account. Just also let us know in the chat if you are, and we will make sure that your account manager also reaches out to you to deal with that if you're a current customer and don't yet have access to those courses. Let's move on to another high-profile and contentious issue in workplace inclusion today, and that's the issue of transgender rights and gender-critical beliefs and how to balance those in the workplace. So firstly, let's ask the audience about that. Are you concerned about conflicts between transgender and gender-critical beliefs in your workplace? Very concerned, somewhat concerned, slightly concerned, not concerned, or not sure. So are you concerned about conflicts between transgender and gender critical beliefs in your workplace? Very concerned, somewhat concerned, slightly concerned, not concerned, or not sure. As always, you can let us know more of your thoughts in the chat. I'd love to hear what your concerns maybe are, how you're addressing those, as we give everyone a moment to answer the poll. And then let's have a look at the results. So 6% very concerned, 11% somewhat concerned, 30% slightly concerned, 47% are not concerned, and 6% not sure. An interesting set of results there. Thomas, explain to us why we should be concerned if we're not already. What is the issue here? What is the conflict that could happen in a workplace?
So under the Equality Act and many other national equality laws, gender or sex reassignment is protected. This means that individuals who have undergone, are undergoing, or plan to undergo sex reassignment cannot be discriminated against on that basis. But at the same time, employment tribunals have also established that gender-critical beliefs, the view that a person cannot change their biological sex, are also protected under the Equalities Act provision for religious and belief. And that means that individuals cannot face workplace requirement for holding or expressing such beliefs.
So workplaces are therefore expected to take both areas and groups into consideration.
Precisely, because, for example, some employees holding gender-critical beliefs have successfully argued at employment tribunals that they were unfairly treated or pushed out of their roles for expressing these views, often on their personal social media account outside of work hours. At the same time, transgender employees have also won tribunal cases after experiencing discrimination in the workplace. Examples include employers refusing to update IT systems with their new name, continuing to use their previous name on official records, or failing to provide inclusive policies for transgender employees. These kind of actions can create a obviously hostile environment and undermine the protection that are supposed to be guaranteed under that very Equality Act.
And Catherine, we've already had some interesting employment tribunals exploring this subject. Tell us about some of those.
Sure. In one recent employment tribunal case, an employee protested the organization's voluntary policy encouraging staff to include pronouns in email signatures by modifying his own signature to read XY chromosome guy / adult human male. Despite requests from management to remove this addition, he refused, leading to his dismissal. The tribunal concluded that the termination was not a response to his beliefs, but to the provocative and inappropriate way he expressed them. The employee's actions were deemed disruptive to the organisation's efforts to promote inclusivity and posed potential harm to its reputation and relationships with service users.
It's a really, really interesting case because it highlights that delicate balance that many organisations have to strike between respecting individual beliefs and also maintaining a workplace culture that promotes inclusivity and respect. And obviously, a lot of people are confused necessarily about the best way to do that. We've had a comment in on the chat there. Someone who is trans and an NHS staff member has experienced a lot of confusion from managers, C-suite, and HR around this issue, which has directly affected them and the projects they've been involved in. And I think confusion from management and HR departments is certainly a feature of some of these cases we've seen. There was one just a few days ago that was resolved in the press where a former civil servant, I believe, settled their case, and that resulted in some reviews of the HR policies in a number of government departments. Tell us a little bit more about what happened with that case.
That's right. So in this case, former civil servant Eleanor Francis settled with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport and the Department for Science for over £116,000. Ms. Francis had raised whistleblowing concerns in 2022 about the department's adoption of a Stonewall-backed gender identity policy, which she argued used politicized language and pressured staff to recognize male people as women. After raising these concerns, she claimed to face ongoing unfair treatment, which continued after her transfer to another department, leading to a toxic work environment and her eventual resignation. The case was settled a few days ago, with the departments agreeing to pay the settlement and review their gender assignment policies.
So do we think that other organisations might want to review similar policies in light of this case?
I think the settlement of Eleanor Francis's case highlights the importance of balancing DEI policies with employees' rights to hold and express their beliefs, including gender-critical views, which are protected under the Equality Act 2010. Organisations have to ensure their policies respect these rights without imposing requirements that infringe on someone else's rights. Another key takeaway is that DEI policies should be clear, neutral, and comply with equality laws. Organisations need to avoid coercive or politicised language and ensure staff are consulted when making significant changes, especially on sensitive issues like gender identity or single-sex spaces. Lastly, the case highlights the need for a workplace culture that allows employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Having a strong, impartial grievance and whistleblowing process is really crucial to maintaining trust and avoiding legal risks like victimization or constructive dismissal.
It sounds like this can really apply to lots of different hot-button social issues at work. Thomas, how does a workplace balance between people who have strongly held views?
Well, what you said is absolutely right. And it is complicated at the same time and also high risk. But the answer is pretty clear. Consistent policies that uphold the rights of all employees while promoting respect and understanding between different perspectives. Alongside this, you want to have sensitive, nuanced, and comprehensive training that focuses on building inclusion. DEI training, frankly, is not a one-time tick box exercise. Rather, it should be a process that engages all staff in an ongoing conversation about how to create an inclusive, supportive workplace where people of many different backgrounds and viewpoints can come together to achieve a shared goal.
Very, very well put. Thank you very much. And we're actually going to be hosting a much more in-depth webinar on this very subject in a few months' time on Wednesday, the 12th of March at midday UK time. We'll be looking at the issue of protected belief in the workplace and how to balance between different characteristics and beliefs under the Equality Act. We also have a special guest on that webinar, an employment law specialist from our partners at WorkNest, who specialises in all manner of matters of employment law. There's a link to register for that webinar coming up in the chat now. It should be 12th of March. Apologies for the it says 19th on the slide. It is the 12th of March, mistake. But you can register for that webinar or forward that link to anyone that you think may be interested. So we're going to take a look at another big issue around diversity and inclusion over the year ahead, and that's all about bystander interventions and how bystander training can add value to some of these difficult workplace situations. So we're going to take another look at a short clip from our bystander interventions course, and we will have a look at that clip right now.
We are all bystanders in our everyday and working lives, and as such, we have a crucial role to play in stepping up and speaking out when we witness inappropriate behaviour.
So there's a very important role for bystander intervention in the workplace context, and we shouldn't underestimate how difficult it can feel for people to challenge behaviour constructively.
So sometimes, even if people witness inappropriate behaviour, they may not feel able to intervene. One of these reasons might be a visceral fear that they are going to draw the fire on themselves. If someone is in a very aggressive state, it can be very frightening to think they might turn that aggression on you. It can be the case that I don't feel I have enough positional power. In other words, the other person is so much more powerful than me that if I call them out, I am the one who will suffer, I am the one who will lose my job, and I just can't take that risk.
There are many different ways in which bystanders can intervene effectively to challenge inappropriate behaviour, and the best approach will depend on the situation.
I think sometimes people have an idea in their head that a bystander intervention is a kind of in-the-moment confrontation. Hang on a minute, what are you doing? Stop that right now. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. There are all kinds of different ways. They can be direct or indirect. So somebody witnessing a problematic behaviour could choose to speak at the time with the person who's perpetrating that behaviour, or they may wait and speak to the person privately later. They may delegate, so they may take the problem to somebody in a position to be able to do something about it as a manager, for example, or somebody with specialist knowledge of the area.
We all have a collective responsibility, and our little piece of information about somebody or some activity could, if joined together with other people's little pieces of information, create a really clear picture of somebody who has abusive behaviour over time and who really needs to be challenged and checked and stopped.
So that was a clip from our course on the topic of bystander intervention, which is one of the ways that you can support staff to take action if they see any problematic behaviour in the workplace. And you can write demo into the chat box now if you'd like to see a bit more of our bystander intervention course. Catherine, just give us an overview of what bystander intervention is if we're not so familiar with it.
Okay, bystander intervention training is designed to equip all of us, all employees, with the knowledge and skills to safely and effectively intervene in situations where harm, harassment, or violence may occur. It sees learners as partners working together to solve a problem. And this approach encourages people to be vigilant, active players in stopping inappropriate comments and behaviour. Because the point is that you can't monitor everything all the time. Neither do you just want to take action in the event of harassment occurring. But it allows people to see themselves as part of the solution. And at the same time, it's reaffirming these appropriate behaviours to yourself.
It can be a tough situation to put staff into, though, can't it? If we see something uncomfortable or upsetting, we might be inclined to ignore it and not make a fuss, especially if we aren't so sure on actually how to help, or maybe are afraid of making things worse.
Yes, that's exactly why conducting training on bystander interventions can be very effective, because it provides you with tools, techniques, which help to reduce that sense of angst and trepidation. It typically focuses on developing skills such as recognizing warning signs, assessing risks, and employing appropriate strategies to intervene. That said, no one should feel pressure to intervene. Gives you the tools to understand situations better. It might be the case that you're the sort of person who would intervene anyway, which means that your intervention might be even more effective.
Thank you very much for taking us through that. And let's ask the audience about that now as well. Do you currently offer bystander intervention training? Yes, it's part of our yearly training. Yes, we did it once. Not yet, but we'd like to. No plans to do so, or not sure. So is bystander intervention training something that you currently offer? Yes, part of our yearly training. Yes, we did it once. Not yet, but would like to. No plans to do so. Or sure. And let's give everyone a moment to answer the poll, and we'll take a little look at the results. So 2% have done it part of the yearly training, 11% have done it once, 39% not yet but would like to, 37% no plans to do so, and 11% not sure. Very, very interesting results there. And it's one of those courses that can be very useful when you're thinking about, for instance, what procedures, what proactive measures you want to take under the Worker Protection Act. To actually do something like bystander intervention training can show that you're taking a proactive approach by supporting staff and training staff that they can maybe call out those kind of behaviours if they see them. So it is a good example of something you can demonstrate as being part of your proactive measures against sexual harassment under the Worker Protection Act. So just before we move on to our next big topic for this webinar, we want to remind you about our 2025 Diversity and Inclusion Calendar, which has all of the major holidays and celebrations and days to be aware of for the year ahead. There's a link to that calendar coming up in the chat box now, and you can grab that calendar for yourself and have a look at that. So our next big topic is menopause at work, and that's become an issue that really companies can no longer afford to ignore, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. It's a pressing issue that spans diversity, inclusion, and employee well-being, and it's costing businesses talent, productivity, and money. The statistics are really alarming. 60% of women in the UK have taken time off work due to menopause symptoms, and nearly 900,000 women have left their jobs entirely because of it, according to CIPD. A staggering 99% of women report that menopause symptoms have negatively impacted their careers. Businesses are already aware of the high costs of staff turnover, particularly when it comes to experienced employees with invaluable institutional knowledge. The financial impact of replacing such staff is significant. It outweighs the costs of creating supportive workplace policies by far.
Absolutely. And what are some of the legal implications in the UK of being or not being a menopause-friendly workplace? I know the Equality and Human Rights Commission have recently published new guidance for employers on how they should be making reasonable adjustments for menopausal women.
Well, the guidance really highlighted the laws that existed for years to protect the growing number of working women experiencing menopause. Already under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, someone going through menopause could be given leave if they showed symptoms caused by menopause, such as anxiety and depression, joint pains, and sleeplessness. And then under the Equality Act 2010, employers could be guilty of discrimination on the grounds of age, sex, or even disability discrimination if they fail to take into account the potential impact of menopause symptoms. The EHRC said these symptoms could be considered a disability, which means there's a legal requirement to consider reasonable adjustments, and importantly, that employment tribunals could be an option if firms fail to provide support. These adjustments were things like time off, flexible hours, relaxed uniform policies, and rest areas.
Thank you for taking us to that. Very, very interesting. And let's actually take a look at one of the clips from our menopause awareness course, which gives some ideas about how employers can offer these kinds of reasonable adjustments.
If you're managing somebody, I think be sympathetic. So one of the staff that I'm direct line managing at the moment is menopausal. And what I do when I speak to her in the mornings every day is I ask her, first of all, how she is. Because actually, I think if you ask the question, you get the answer, don't you? So if you don't ask anybody how they are, that shows to me that you're not really interested and you don't really care. And actually, I understand that everybody's busy in the workplace at the moment. So it's really important that you start those questions with your staff and you say, how are you? And if they go fine, you might want to say, how are you really, though?
So to a manager, I would really like to say, to be honest and have that conversation. It can be quite scary, not just for you, but for the person that you're speaking to as well. It might be something that hasn't occurred to them. But actually starting to have those conversations and look at symptoms has really helped me to go to my GP and say, actually, I do need some support with this. I didn't really sort of know what support was out there for me, but my supervisor did. They were fantastic, and she sort of helped me to go on this journey.
Don't ask them what's wrong, because if you ask us what's wrong, we will say nothing, because that comes across as almost like a negative question, a bit patronising. So you have to ask, what are you going through? How are you feeling? Don't say to them, oh, is it the wrong time of the month again? Because that is so disrespectful. And ask them what they need. Do they want 5 minutes? Shall I make you a cup of tea? Speak to them on a normal, calming level, and from that area. Don't be patronising and try and understand something that, unless you're going through the hell, you won't know.
The one thing I would say is that you know your member of staff. So for me, in my example, and this did happen to me actually in a workplace, is that you're generally bright and bubbly and friendly. You come into work and you chat to people and you get on with your job and you're good at your job and you're a consummate professional. But then you notice that this member of staff actually may be quiet on some days. Work seems to be slipping behind, not themselves. And I think it's really important that if you can be aware of that kind of change in a person.
So that was just a brief clip from one of the series of menopause awareness courses that we have. We've been working on this issue at VinciWorks for a number of years, and it's only becoming more of a relevant topic. If you want to know more about those courses or how to roll them out, you can write menopause into the chat box and we'll be in touch with you to show you some more of those courses. Now, there have also been some issues of discrimination and discrimination employment tribunal cases around menopause support. There was recently a case that we read about where a teacher was awarded £60,000 by an employment tribunal based on disability discrimination related to menopause.
So in this case, as you alluded to, a Scottish teacher was awarded £60,000 by an employment tribunal because she refused to move schools, stating that the move would have exacerbated her menopausal symptoms. After the teacher refused, she was dismissed from her position while on sick leave.
And they end up obviously winning the employment tribunal. So that's certainly something that for us to be conscious of when thinking about those kinds of issues. So in general, what can organisations do to become more menopause friendly?
It's actually pretty straightforward and not as daunting or as expensive as it may seem at first. Start by offering training on menopause awareness and making sure your policies are clear and supportive. This goes a long way in removing stigma and encourages open conversations about the impact of menopause, particularly around issues like gender pay gap and age discrimination. Next, take a look at your data to see how older women are supported within the company. If you notice a lack of women in senior roles, it could be a sign that menopause policies need improvement. Implementing a simple policy that includes menopause leave, flexible working, and extra sick days can go a long way in supporting employees during this stage. It's important to ensure that staff know how to ask for help and extra support. Things as simple as sitting near a window or reducing the heat. These things can make a difference. Finally, remember that retaining experienced employees is always more cost-effective than recruiting new ones. By creating supportive policies, you'll not only improve retention, but also demonstrate your organization's commitment to valuing employees. This can help attract and keep top talent, all while enhancing your company's reputation as a progressive and inclusive employer.
Thank you very, very much for taking us through those issues. And let's look at now the last topic for today, and we'll ask our last also poll question for today on that topic, which is on neurodiversity. Do you think your organization is neurodiversity friendly? Strongly agree, unsure, disagree, or strongly disagree. So do you think your organization is neurodiversity friendly? Strongly agree, unsure, disagree, or strongly disagree? We'll give everyone a moment to answer the poll question, and then we'll have a look at the results. So we have 9% strongly agree, 32% agree, 45% unsure, 11% disagree, and 2% strongly disagree. Very interesting results there. What does it actually mean to be neurodiversity friendly in the workplace?
Ultimately, it's about creating an environment where everyone can maximize their strengths and work in a way that suits their needs, which will lead to increased productivity, retention, satisfaction, and ultimately better output for your organization. It's not easy, but with 1 in 7 people in the UK being neurodivergent, it's an absolute must. It's also important that employers have good and supportive systems for discussing reasonable adjustments and not making these hard to access. Ideally, anyone should be able to access them or discuss them without prejudice and without being made to feel that they're doing something wrong by raising an issue like this with their employer.
Thank you very much for that. And we have a guide on being neurodiversity friendly in the workplace. The link to that guide is coming up in the chat now. The guide's available in English and also in Welsh, and both of the links are coming up in chat now. If you would like to access those, you can download those and have a look through about some different ideas and ways to make your organization more neurodiversity friendly. Thomas, there's also some legal imperative to be creating a neurodiversity friendly workplace. What's the legal risk of ignoring this as a compliance issue?
Well, there's been a massive growth of employment tribunals, quite frankly, which involve allegations of neurodiversity discrimination. Just in the last year, for example, there were 102 of these employment tribunals, which might not sound like very many, but it's up from only 70 cases in 2020. In fact, the number of neurodiversity discrimination cases at employment tribunals has quadrupled in the past 5 years. And the important part is the average cost of defending a tribunal is now £8,500. That's before any award you might have to pay or the claimant's legal fees if the employer wins. Don't want to end up on the wrong side of an employment tribunal because you didn't grant employees the right support, especially if the cost of implementing such support is very little.
Very, very good point. Thank you so much for taking us through that. A lot of to pay attention to in DEI issues. That's just about all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to everyone for being with us. Thank you to our panelists, Thomas Falk and Catherine Holt. Thank you to everyone who came along today, who asked us questions, who answered poll questions and gave us your thoughts. We really appreciate you coming along and spending the hour with us. If you'd like any more information about how VinciWorks can help, let us know in the chat box. It will be in touch. You can write demo into the chat box. Someone will reach out to you to talk about any of the issues we've covered today or any other issues you would like covered, how we can help with your compliance programs. But thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again on another VinciWorks webinar